My daughter stood in front of 180 wedding guests and told the world that I killed her mother. She said I was a broke failure, a man too pathetic to save his wife or father, so useless that mom died ashamed of me. That was her opening speech delivered in a $15,000 Vera Wang gown, holding a crystal champagne flute, basking in the spotlight like she had just won an award for cruelty. Guests laughed nervously, hedge fund executives nodded with smug approval, and her new in-laws, the Whitfields, smiled as if they had finally proven their superiority. I sat quietly in the back corner at table 12 next to the kitchen doors, wearing a $200 suit I had owned for 6 years. I didn't flinch. I didn't interrupt. I didn't even sip my water. But inside, I knew something no one else in that glittering ballroom suspected. Sophia had just lit the fuse on the most devastating family drama this crowd had ever seen. Because while she mocked me as a failure, my Chase account held 432 hours. My Goldman Sachs portfolio was worth another $41,293,156, and I owned the very mansion her new husband's family lived in for exactly $1 a year. This wasn't just a wedding. It was about to become a courtroom. People love a viral story, a revenge story that flips the script. They share it, they hashtag it, they turn it into TikToks and reaction videos. But none of them were in that ballroom when Sophia weaponized her mother's death to humiliate me. None of them heard her say that mom would be proud she'd finally found a real father figure in her new father-in-law, Edward Whitfield Sr. None of them saw the smirks, the whispers, the way the Whitfields pretended to embrace her while silently erasing me. They didn't see how cruelly my own daughter betrayed me in public for applause. What they also didn't see the small rose gold iPhone 7 Plus in my jacket pocket. The one that still held Helen's final voice memo recorded 3 days before she died. A recording she made specifically for this moment in case Sophia ever dishonored her memory for social points. I had kept it charged for 8 years, and now as Sophia basked in fake affection, surrounded by wealth, she thought she had earned that phone was about to become a nuclear option. This is not just another wedding revenge story. This is about hidden wealth, sovereign silence, and a $1 inheritance that shocked millions online. By the end of the night, Sophia would lose her husband, the Whitfields would lose their legacy, and a lesson worth $74 million would be carved into everyone's memory. So let me take you back to that night to table 12, where a quiet man in the corner decided to stop being silent. Sophia raised her glass high, her diamond bracelet catching the light, her voice smooth and confident as it carried across the ballroom. "I never thought I would end up here," she said, smiling at the glittering crowd. "Married to a man from such an accomplished family, surrounded by people who know what true success looks like." The guests at the Whitfield table clapped politely, their pearls and cufflinks shimmering under the chandeliers. I sat still at table 12, my hands folded, my expression calm. On the surface, it looked like a father basking in pride. In reality, I was listening to my daughter erase me from her life in real time. She looked directly at me, her blue eyes cold and deliberate. "My childhood wasn't easy," she continued. "My father tried, but he never really amounted to much. After my mother passed away, he gave up on life, on success, on providing. There were times I was embarrassed by him, embarrassed by his mediocrity. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, and I caught the smirk on Andrew Whitfield's lips as he placed his hand proudly on hers. The Whitfields nodded along as though this performance had been rehearsed just for them. Marianne Whitfield dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin, pretending to be touched by Sophia's courage, while Edward Whitfield Sr. leaned back in his chair, satisfied that his family had secured another prize for their lineage. And then came the knife. Sophia lifted her chin and said, "Sometimes I used to wonder if my mother regretted the man she married, if she died ashamed of him. But then I met Andrew. I met his family, and they showed me what real standards look like, what true success means. They welcomed me like a daughter, and for that I am grateful." The applause was thunderous, half the room standing to toast her bravery, her rise above her working-class roots. My daughter embraced her new father-in-law, kissing him on the cheek as though he had replaced me entirely. That moment was more than humiliation. It was betrayal layered on betrayal. Betrayal of blood, betrayal of truth. Betrayal of the promise I had made to her mother as she lay dying. Helen had warned me that Sophia's heart was growing cold, that she valued wealth and image more than kindness. She begged me not to enable it with money, to let her earn her character the hard way. For 8 years, I honored that request, living small, while secretly shielding Sophia from disaster. And here she was, weaponizing Helen's death for applause, announcing to 180 guests that her mother's memory proved I was a failure. The Whitfields reveled in it. They had always looked at me with polite contempt, making subtle comments about how fortunate Sophia was to be marrying up. Edward Sr. once patted me on the shoulder and said, "You did the best you could with limited resources. We'll take it from here." In their eyes, I was not a partner in this wedding. I was a footnote, a placeholder father to be dismissed once Sophia stepped into their circle. And Sophia fed that narrative perfectly, sacrificing her own father's dignity in exchange for acceptance into their world. What stung the most wasn't the lies, but the truth buried inside them. Yes, I had let her believe I was broke. Yes, I had allowed her to struggle with rent and loans while quietly bailing her out in secret. She thought her success was independent, her escape from mediocrity self-made. And she wanted the world to believe it too. She wanted the spotlight, the validation, the illusion that she had risen above her embarrassing father. In her hunger to belong, she killed me off in front of everyone, metaphorically burying me next to Helen, just to secure her place at the Whitfield table. The applause felt like knives against my skin. A few guests glanced at me with pity, but most avoided my eyes, unwilling to align themselves with the man being mocked. Sophia raised her glass one final time. "To my new family, to the people who have shown me what it means to truly achieve something with your life, and to my real father figure, Edward Whitfield, who has already taught me more than I could have dreamed." The room erupted again, crystal glasses, clinking champagne, spilling onto white linens. And then she looked at me, smiling sweetly, and added, "And to my own father sitting back there at table 12. He did his best with what little he had." Laughter followed. Laughter at the man who had sacrificed everything to save her mother. Laughter at the father who had quietly kept her afloat for 8 years. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I had endured silence, ridicule, and distance for nearly a decade. I had promised Helen I would not reveal the truth unless Sophia crossed a line she could never return from. That line was now burned into the floor of that ballroom. Betrayal is not always about money or loyalty. Sometimes betrayal is when your own child chooses strangers over you, mocks your love, and rewrites your history for applause. Sophia had done all three, and she had done it in front of the world. The Whitfields smiled like they had won. They thought they had stolen my daughter, absorbed her into their world of old money and false prestige. They thought they had silenced me forever. But I knew what they didn't. I had every receipt, every document, every truth lined up like dominoes. And once I set them falling, there would be no way to stop the chain reaction. Sophia thought she was rising into a new family. She was about to learn that building a throne on lies only ensures you'll be buried beneath the truth. The Whitfields knew how to put on a performance. They draped their affection over Sophia like expensive silk, every embrace choreographed for maximum visibility, every word of endearment carefully designed to signal to the room that she was now theirs. Edward Whitfield Sr., patriarch of the clan, pulled her close after her speech, kissing her on the forehead as though he had raised her himself. Marianne, his wife, dabbed her eyes dramatically with her napkin and whispered loud enough for half the table to hear, "We couldn't be prouder of our new daughter." Andrew, her brand new husband, held her hand tightly and looked at her with a gaze so polished it felt like an act rehearsed in the mirror. To the 180 guests in the ballroom, it looked like a fairy tale, an orphaned daughter rescued from mediocrity, finally embraced by a family of wealth and refinement. But I knew better. That entire show was staged not to lift Sophia up, but to push me further down. Every kiss, every compliment, every exaggerated hug was another brick in the wall they were building between her and me. They didn't just want to welcome her, they wanted to erase me. I sat at table 12, the exile's corner, next to an elderly great aunt who could barely hear, and 2 distant cousins who avoided eye contact. From there, I had the perfect view of their little performance. Marianne leaned over to Sophia and whispered something in her ear. Sophia giggled, resting her head on Marianne's shoulder, as though she had known this woman her whole life. Edward raised his glass to her with fatherly pride, the kind I used to show her when she was a little girl, winning spelling bees or scoring goals in youth soccer. That look belonged to me once, but now it was handed over like a title deed gifted to a family that believed money rewrote history. Their affection was hollow, but the audience couldn't see it. To the hedge fund managers and their wives, to the country club crowd, it looked genuine. They saw an old money dynasty extending its embrace to a beautiful bride, lifting her into their legacy. They didn't notice the smirk Edward Sr. gave me as he squeezed her hand. They didn't hear the way Marianne said, "You're finally where you belong," as though my blood and Helen's sacrifice had been nothing but a holding pattern until the Whitfields came along. I had been in enough boardrooms and government contracts to recognize a hostile takeover when I saw one. That night, the Whitfields weren't just marrying Sophia into their family, they were annexing her, claiming her as property, and using their public affection to make sure everyone knew she had traded up. The message was clear: Sophia was now a Whitfield, not a Carter. And Daniel Carter, the man who had given her life, who had sat up nights by Helen's hospital bed, who had quietly paid every bill she couldn't handle, was no longer relevant. The applause after Sophia's toast hadn't died down before Marianne clutched her hand again, beaming as though the spotlight itself had shifted permanently away from me. "We've waited so long for this moment," she said, squeezing her voice into that faux sincere tone that society women perfect after years of charity luncheons and board seats. "Sophia deserves a family that appreciates her brilliance." The implication was sharp as glass. I had failed to appreciate her. I had failed to raise her properly. The Whitfields were here to correct my mistakes. Even Andrew, polished in his tailored tuxedo, played his part perfectly. He pulled Sophia in close for photos, whispering into her ear, making sure to frame every shot with his parents, not with me. Photographers circled them like hawks, snapping image after image of the new power couple flanked by Edward and Marianne. When it was my turn for a photo, Sophia's smile stiffened her body, angled away the warmth gone from her eyes. Andrew put his hand firmly on her back, steering her, subtly, almost possessively, away from me. I wasn't family anymore. I was background. The cruelest part wasn't even their performance. It was how much Sophia seemed to drink it in. She leaned into Edward's embrace as though he really had been the one who taught her how to ride a bike, how to drive, how to stand up for herself. She laughed with Marianne as though this woman had packed her school lunches and kissed her forehead before every exam. She looked at Andrew like he had rescued her from a childhood of hardship, when the truth was she had never known hunger, never known a day without safety, never known what real poverty felt like. But in her desperation to belong to this family, she was willing to pretend her entire life before them had been nothing but a prologue to this moment. And the Whitfields rewarded her for it. They paraded her around the ballroom like a trophy, their voices dripping with praise. "She's the brightest jewel in the Whitfield crown," Edward boomed to a circle of bankers. "She's more polished than any debutante we've ever known," Marianne declared. "She's proof that character shines through," Andrew added with a smirk. The irony made my chest ache. They praised her for her character while encouraging her to betray the very people who had given her life and love. I sat silently watching it unfold. I had seen deception before I had seen manipulation before, but nothing had ever cut as deeply as watching my own daughter bask in counterfeit affection, while the truth of her mother's love was buried beneath their applause. They thought they were clever. They thought I was powerless. They thought a quiet man at table 12 could be erased with champagne toasts and counterfeit hugs. What they didn't realize was that their entire act, every false embrace, every smug look, every whispered word of superiority, was adding fuel to the fire. They weren't erasing me. They were giving me the perfect stage, because the moment Helen's voice filled that ballroom, their performance would collapse and everyone would see what they really were: frauds clinging to a legacy they didn't own, propping up their reputation with borrowed affection. The Whitfields thought they were welcoming Sophia into their family. What they didn't realize was that by mocking me, by parading their fake affection, they were also stepping straight into the trap I had been holding for 8 years. As the applause for Sophia's speech echoed through the ballroom, my mind slipped away from the glittering chandeliers and the polished marble floors. It went back to a small hospital room where the hum of machines replaced music, and Helen's voice, fragile but steady, carried more weight than any toaster performance. I could still see her lying there, her hand wrapped around mine, her eyes too bright from the morphine, but still sharp enough to pierce my defenses. She had always been able to read me, always been able to see past the silence I wore like armor. She had whispered to me one night when the pain had subsided just long enough to allow a moment of honesty. Daniel, promise me you won't let Sophia lose herself. Promise me you won't spoil her with money not after I'm gone. She needs to learn who she is, not just what she has. I had nodded, unable to speak, my throat too tight with grief. She pressed harder. And if she ever uses my memory as a weapon against you, if she ever dishonors me to climb higher, then you have my permission to show her the truth, no matter how much it hurts. 3 days before she died, too weak to hold a pen, too tired to sit upright, Helen had picked up her rose gold iPhone and recorded a voice memo. I remember the exact glow of the screen in that dimly lit room. Her voice was trembling, but fierce, every word etched into my bones. She's becoming cruel, Daniel. Not just selfish cruel. If she crosses the line, play this. Don't let her rewrite me. Don't let her destroy you to elevate herself. That recording became my compass, my silent partner through 8 years of pretending. I kept the phone charged, tucked away in a drawer, unable to delete it, unable even to listen to it again. Just knowing it existed was enough. It was proof of what Helen had seen, proof of what I had felt, but refused to admit that our daughter was drifting into something dangerous, something hollow. And so I waited. I waited through birthdays where Sophia barely called, through holidays where her gifts were more obligation than love, through conversations where she looked at me with quiet embarrassment, as though being my daughter was a burden she carried. Silence became my shield. When she moved into her first Manhattan apartment and complained about rent, I stayed quiet, sending the landlord an anonymous cashier's check for her security deposit. When she maxed out her credit card on designer handbags and called me crying, I stayed quiet and then cleared the balance before the late fees hit. When her student loan collectors threatened her, I stayed quiet, writing the checks in someone else's name. She thought fate had been merciful, that coincidences had carried her. I let her think that. I let her believe she was independent, that she was stronger than me, better than me. All the while I was the invisible scaffolding holding her life together. 8 years of silence. 8 years of watching her grow colder, chasing a life she didn't earn, aligning herself with people who valued prestige over compassion. I kept waiting for her to soften, to turn back, to prove Helen wrong. But with every passing year, it became harder to recognize the little girl I had once carried on my shoulders at the park, the girl who used to slip handwritten notes under my study door saying, "I love you, Daddy." What tore me apart most wasn't her rejection of me, it was her betrayal of Helen's memory. Helen had been the best of us, a kindergarten teacher who lived on $45,000 a year, who made every child feel like they mattered, who believed that dignity was worth more than diamonds. She had chosen to keep working even when my contracts brought in millions, because she wanted Sophia to grow up grounded. And yet here we were, 8 years after her death, with Sophia standing in a ballroom full of strangers, declaring that her mother had died, ashamed of me. Those words were acid poured directly onto Helen's grave. Sitting there at table 12, I felt the weight of those 8 silent years press against my chest. I thought about the long nights when I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I had done the right thing by keeping the secret of my wealth. I thought about the day the Pentagon wired me $40 million, $5 million for a classified cyber defense project. Money I couldn't acknowledge, money I couldn't touch without breaking the rules of my clearance. I thought about the IPO of the startup I had helped build, shares worth $31.2 million that sat quietly in my portfolio while I drove a 10-year-old Honda. I thought about the deed to the Whitfield estate sitting in my safe, proof that their grand legacy was nothing more than smoke and mirrors propped up by my discretion. And yet through all of it, I never broke my silence. Because silence was loyalty. Silence was my tribute to Helen. Silence was the only weapon I had left that didn't cost blood. Until tonight. When Sophia stood at that podium and turned Helen's death into a punchline, I felt something inside me harden. It wasn't rage, it was clarity. The line had been crossed, the one Helen had warned me about. This was no longer just about humiliation. This was about truth, about honoring my wife's dying wish. I had stayed silent for 8 years, but silence is not infinite. Silence is leverage, and leverage is only valuable when you choose the right moment to use it. The voice memo was ready. The bank statements were ready. The property deed was ready. My will, rewritten just hours before, was ready. For 8 years I had been waiting, not for revenge, but for justice. And now with 180 witnesses, with the Whitfields basking in borrowed glory, with Sophia wrapped in counterfeit love, the time had finally come. For 8 years, silence was not weakness, it was strategy. While Sophia thought I was too small, too broke, too humiliated to fight back, I was quietly assembling the kind of evidence that doesn't just settle arguments, it ends them. Piece by piece, file by file, I built a record so airtight that when the day came, no amount of lies, no army of lawyers, no crocodile tears could rewrite the truth. The foundation of my plan was Helen's voice memo. That single recording was my nuclear option. It wasn't just the words, though. Her words were enough to shatter Sophia's carefully crafted image. It was the timestamp, the metadata, the undeniable proof that this was no fabrication. January 12th, 2016, 11:47 p.m. Original iPhone audio file, never altered, never spliced. I had it backed up on 3 different encrypted drives stored in the cloud and even hidden in a safety deposit box under a different name. If Sophia ever crossed the line, if she ever dared to use her mother's death as a weapon, then her mother's voice would rise from the grave to confront her. But the recording was only the beginning. I knew words alone could be dismissed, twisted by manipulation, drowned out by crocodile tears. So I built a fortress of evidence around it. Every month for 8 years, when I paid off Sophia's loans and her credit card bills, when I slipped her landlord anonymous cashier's checks, I kept records. Bank slips, copies of checks, transaction histories, all logged, dated, and stored in a spreadsheet I built myself. I documented every penny, $87,000 in student loan payments, $43,000 in credit card bailouts, $91,000 for deposits and rent support, $26,000 for her BMW X. The grand total came to $247,000, and I highlighted the number in red on the first line of the spreadsheet. It wasn't just money. It was a record of love disguised as coincidence, and soon it would be proof that Sophia's independence was an illusion funded by the very man she mocked. Next came the financials, the kind of numbers that silence even the most arrogant social climbers. My Chase account with a current balance of $33,187,432. My Goldman Sachs investment portfolio valued at $41,293,156. I printed statements on official letterhead and saved digital copies in case anyone accused me of forgery. I cropped screenshots to display only the balances and the current date, so there would be no distractions, no loopholes for doubt. One tap on a screen and every smirk at the Whitfield table would vanish, and then the crown jewel, the property deed. For 15 years, the Whitfields had paraded their Greenwich estate as a symbol of their old money legacy, the ancestral home of 4 generations. But the truth was written in ink and notarized in 2009 when their railroad fortune collapsed. I bought that estate at a bankruptcy auction for $3.2 million, then allowed them to rent it back for $1 a year under a charitable agreement to save them from public disgrace. Every year, I paid the $63,000 in property taxes and the $40,000 in maintenance fees. Every year, they bragged about their mansion, oblivious to the fact that the man they mocked owned it outright. The original deed, notarized and stamped, was locked in my safe. Copies were filed with the county clerk's office public record for anyone willing to search. I even had photographs of the property records pulled directly from the Connecticut registry, just in case anyone dared to shout forgery. But evidence means nothing if you can't control the battlefield. I knew the Whitfields would fight dirty, so I made sure my case was cleaner than a federal investigation. I consulted my estate attorney months before the wedding. Together, we rewrote my will. The old version left everything, houses, accounts, investments, pensions, to Sophia. The new version, signed and notarized at 3:30 p.m., the day of the wedding, reduced her inheritance to exactly $1. The rest, $73.9 million, was earmarked for the American Cancer Society in Helen's memory. To make it bulletproof, we had 3 attorneys witness it, and I underwent a psychiatric evaluation to confirm I was of sound mind. No Whitfield lawyer, no courtroom performance could overturn that document. Even the timing of the reveal was part of the plan. I didn't want a messy outburst that could be dismissed as a father's drunken rage. I wanted precision. First, Helen's voice to remind everyone of the truth. Second, the bank statements, undeniable and current. Third, the property deed humiliating Edward Whitfield Sr. in front of his entire circle. Fourth, the spreadsheet of $247,000 in quiet rescues. And finally, the will rewritten hours earlier, stripping Sophia of the fortune she believed was hers by right. Each piece alone was strong. Together they were unbreakable. Some men fight with fists, others with lawyers. I had something more dangerous preparation. While the Whitfields laughed at me while Sophia distanced herself from me, I was assembling a case so complete that when I finally spoke, silence would fall over that ballroom like a guillotine. I didn't just want to defend myself. I wanted to dismantle their illusion brick by brick in front of the very people whose approval Sophia had been desperate to win. And when I was done, there would be no applause for her, no smug smiles from the Whitfields, no more laughter at the man in the cheap suit at table 12. There would only be truth. When the DJ called for the father of the bride to speak, I could feel the room waiting for my polite little thank you, a harmless story about Sophia's childhood, maybe a toast to Andrew and the Whitfields. Sophia herself, smug from her performance, leaned toward the microphone and told everyone I was too shy for public speaking. Laughter rolled across the ballroom like thunder. That was the moment I stood up. The room stilled. 180 heads turned to see the man in the cheap $200 suit make his way to the podium. I walked slowly, deliberately, my shoes tapping against the marble floor. Sophia's face drained of color. For just a flicker, I saw the little girl she once was, the child who used to run into my arms after school. But that image was gone as quickly as it came. She knew I was about to speak, and she looked terrified. I took the microphone, let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice calm steady. "I want to thank you for being here tonight. It has been educational." A few chuckles rippled across the room, but most people were already shifting uneasily. I glanced at Edward Whitfield Sr., whose smirk was starting to falter. Then I looked at Sophia. "My daughter gave a beautiful speech tonight. She said her mother died ashamed of me. She said I was a failure. She said she found a real father figure in this family." I held up Helen's rose gold iPhone, its surface gleaming under the chandeliers. "But before you decide what kind of man I am, I think you should hear what her mother actually said in her final days." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Sophia jumped to her feet. "Dad, don't sit down, Sophia," I said, my voice cutting sharper than any blade. She froze. I plugged the phone into the sound system, and then Helen's voice, fragile but undeniable, filled the ballroom. "She's become cruel, Daniel. Not just selfish cruel. Last week when the nurse was helping me, Sophia asked when I was finally going to die so you could get back to normal life. She said she was embarrassed to bring friends around because of how pathetic you'd become. She wished she'd been born into a different family." The air was sucked out of the room. Guests stared at Sophia in disbelief, some covering their mouths, others whispering furiously. Edward's face turned gray. Marianne's napkin shook in her hand. I let the recording finish, Helen's voice whispering her final plea. "Promise me you won't enable this behavior with money after I'm gone. Promise me you'll make her earn her character the hard way." I disconnected the phone and looked straight at Sophia. "That was your mother's dying wish, and I honored it. For 8 years I let you believe we were broke. For 8 years I let you struggle, hoping you'd build character. Instead, you became exactly what she feared." I lifted my other phone, showing the bright screen to the crowd. "Here is my current balance at Chase Bank, $33,187,432. Here is my Goldman Sachs portfolio, $41,900, $293, $156. So no, Sophia, your mother did not die ashamed of me. She died worried about you." The crowd was stunned. I could see guests craning their necks trying to read the numbers. The Whitfield's smug expressions collapsed into disbelief. Then I pulled out a folder holding up the deed. "This is the property record for the Whitfield estate. The house, you've all been told, has been in their family for generations. Public record shows I bought it in 2009 for $3.2 million when the Whitfields filed for bankruptcy. For the last 15 years, they have been renting it from me for exactly $1 a year." The room erupted. Guests murmured in shock. Phones were pulled out, fingers flying across screens to search property records. Edward looked like someone had just ripped the floor out from under him. Marianne broke into sobs. Andrew stared at Sophia like she had betrayed him personally. But I wasn't done. I opened the spreadsheet on my phone and projected it onto the venue's screen. For those who think Sophia pulled herself up from hardship, let me clarify. I paid $87,000 in student loans. I cleared $43,000 in credit card debt. I paid $91,000 in deposits and rent. I even covered $26,000 for her BMW. That is $247,000 in total, every penny I kept secret to honor her mother's wishes. And tonight she repaid that by telling you I was a failure. Guests turned on Sophia with open disgust. Some were recording, others whispering words like fraud and liar. Her mascara streamed down her cheeks. Finally, I pulled out a sealed envelope. And this I said, raising it high, is my new will signed and notarized this very afternoon. My old will left everything to Sophia. My new will leaves her exactly $1. The rest, approximately $74 million, goes to the American Cancer Society in memory of my wife Helen, a woman who valued kindness over wealth and truth over appearances. I folded the will and tucked it back into my jacket. Effective immediately. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Sophia collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Edward clenched his fist, too stunned to speak. Marianne wailed. Andrew pushed his chair back, staring at his bride with raw anger. Guests murmured in disbelief, filming, whispering, sending messages that would travel faster than wildfire. I looked at Sophia one last time. Congratulations on your wedding. You wanted a family with real money and real class. Now you have them. But don't forget you're living in my house. I placed the microphone down, my hands steady, and walked back toward table 12. I had just turned a wedding into a courtroom, and the verdict was final. The moment I left the microphone behind, chaos swallowed the ballroom. Sophia's scream cut through the air, raw and desperate, shattering the silence I had left in my wake. Guests recoiled as she stood there, her $15,000 dress wrinkled from her trembling fists, clutching the fabric mascara streaking down her cheeks in black rivers. "You can't do this," she cried. "You can't just destroy my life like this." Her voice was shrill, almost childlike, but no one moved to comfort her. The applause she had basked in minutes earlier was gone, replaced with a silence more damning than words. Edward Whitfield Sr. looked like a man gutted from the inside out. His face was gray, his eyes darting around the room as whispers spread. Some guests were already searching property records on their phones, confirming what I had revealed about the mansion. Marianne was sobbing uncontrollably into her napkin, not because she cared about me or even Sophia, but because her carefully constructed facade of social superiority had collapsed in a matter of minutes. Andrew stared at Sophia with a mix of anger and disbelief, as though he had been tricked into marrying not a prize, but a liability. And the guests. God, the guests were relentless. Some filmed openly, phones raised high, as though they were documenting a scandal for Netflix. Others whispered with gleeful cruelty, repeating words like liar, fraud, and social climber. Within minutes, I knew the story would explode online. All it would take was one video uploaded to TikTok or YouTube, and the Whitfield's empire of reputation would crumble in front of millions. Sophia turned to me again, her voice cracking. 30 years I've been your daughter, and you humiliate me like this, in front of everyone I know. Her words hung in the air, desperate, pleading, but I stayed silent. For years, silence had been my shield, and tonight it was my weapon. The Whitfields weren't silent, though. Edward finally found his voice, pointing a shaking finger at me. "This is a setup, forged documents, lies." But even as he shouted, his guests were pulling up the public registry on their phones, showing each other the undeniable truth. "It's right here," one man whispered loudly enough for the table to hear. "Property transfer, 2009. Daniel Carter." Another guest muttered, "He pays their taxes. It's public record." Edward slumped back into his chair, his fury dissolving into despair. Marianne wailed louder, clutching at her pearls. 40 years we've told everyone that house was our legacy. We're ruined, completely ruined. Guests who once orbited her like satellites now looked away, unwilling to be pulled into the black hole of her shame. Andrew, red-faced and furious, snapped at Sophia. "You humiliated me. You told me your father was broke, that he couldn't even pay his bills. You told me we were rescuing you, and now I find out he's richer than all of us put together and owns my parents' house." He ripped his hand away from hers, the perfect groom's mask shattered. Sophia tried to grab him, but he shoved his chair back so violently it toppled over. "I don't even know who you are anymore," he hissed. That was the moment the Whitfield marriage ended, less than 3 hours after it began. By the time I walked out of the ballroom into the cool Connecticut night, I could already hear the buzz of notifications on the guests' phones. Videos were being uploaded, streams were going live. The story was too big to stay contained. By midnight, hashtags were trending. Shijor's wedding revenge, Shij family drama, Shijdarshi hidden wealth. By dawn, millions would know the truth. The fallout was immediate. Within a week, the Whitfields were pariahs. Edward lost memberships in 3 country clubs. Marianne was quietly asked to resign from the charity board she had chaired for over a decade. Invitations that once poured in from high society circles dried up completely. Their phone calls went unanswered, their friends too embarrassed to be associated with them. Sophia's life unraveled even faster. Andrew filed for annulment 37 days after the wedding, citing fraudulent misrepresentation. The video of the confrontation had already gone viral, with millions of views across YouTube and TikTok. Sophia's face, tear-streaked, desperate, broken, became a meme overnight. Brands she had courted for marketing deals cut ties. Her name was whispered in corporate offices as a cautionary tale. I stayed silent through it all. I didn't gloat, I didn't defend myself, I didn't grant interviews. I let the evidence, the voice of my wife and the spectacle of their downfall speak louder than anything I could have said. The internet had turned the wedding into a courtroom, and the verdict was permanent, guilty of greed, guilty of betrayal, guilty of building a life on lies. Some said I went too far, that I could have spoken to Sophia privately, spared her the public humiliation. Those people never heard Helen's recording. They never saw the smug look in Sophia's eyes as she declared her mother had died ashamed of me. They never spent 8 years honoring a dying woman's wish only to watch it spat on for applause. The truth is, I didn't destroy Sophia or the Whitfields. I simply stopped protecting them. I let the world see what I had seen all along, and once the mask was ripped away, there was nothing left to hide behind. Their reputations were ashes, their legacies dust. Sophia, the bride who thought she had married into glory, was left with nothing but an annulment in a viral scarlet letter. The Whitfields, once kings and queens of their social circle, were reduced to whispers of pity and mockery. And me, I went home to my quiet condo, poured a cup of coffee, and kept Helen's phone charged by my bedside. Justice, I realize, doesn't always come in courtrooms. Sometimes it comes at weddings. Sometimes it comes with silence. And sometimes it comes when the world finally sees the truth for itself. The night of the wedding should have ended when I walked out of the ballroom, but it didn't. Hours later, after the last champagne flute was abandoned and the last guest left whispering scandal into the night, I sat in my small condo, still wearing the suit Sophia had mocked. The silence was heavy, the kind that follows a storm. I thought it was finished. I thought the damage was complete. But at 11:30, my phone buzzed. It was Sophia. Her voice was smaller than I remembered, stripped of the arrogance she had carried into her speech. "Dad, please, we need to talk." Against my better judgment, I looked out the window. There she was, parked under the streetlight in the same BMW I had been secretly paying for, still wearing her $15,000 wedding gown. Her makeup was smeared, her hair undone, her entire body slumped, like the weight of the world had finally crushed her shoulders. For a moment, I almost saw my little girl again, the one who used to sneak into my study to say goodnight, the one who used to beg me to stay a little longer at the park. I went downstairs. She leaned against the car, arms wrapped around herself as if she could shield her heart from the cold. "The reception ended early," she said bitterly. "Half the guests left after your speech. The rest stayed just to film the meltdown." She gave a hollow laugh. "Reginald's parents are talking about annulment. They're saying I lied, that I committed fraud by not telling them the truth about you." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Do you know what the funny part is? Reginald doesn't even care about the humiliation. He's furious because you're richer than his entire family combined. He spent years bragging he was marrying down for love, and now..." She trailed off, choking on the words. For a heartbeat, I almost reached for her. I almost told her it would be okay. But then I remembered Helen's voice. "Promise me you won't enable this behavior. Promise me you'll make her earn her character the hard way." That promise was heavier than my sympathy. "I listened to the recording again," Sophia said quietly. 6 times. Mom was right about me. For the first time in years, her voice cracked with something real. Vulnerability. Regret. Maybe even truth. But then she hardened. That doesn't excuse what you did tonight. You humiliated me. You ruined my marriage before it even started. You made me a joke in front of everyone I know. I shook my head. You did that yourself, Sophia. I just provided the evidence. Her face twisted with anger. Do you even care what this does to me? By tomorrow morning, everyone in Greenwich will know. My career, my friends, my reputation, it's all gone. You destroyed it. I looked at her, my voice steady. I didn't destroy you. I stopped protecting you. For a long moment we stood in silence, just a father and daughter beneath the harsh glare of a streetlight. Then her tone turned cold, sharp as glass. I'll never forgive you. Never. You're dead to me just like Mom. She got back into her BMW, slammed the door, and drove away. The sound of the engine faded into the night, leaving me standing alone, my hands heavy at my sides. That was the last time I ever saw Sophia. Weeks later, I received a letter in the mail written in elegant cursive on cream stationery. It was from Marianne Whitfield. Daniel, we owe you an apology, she wrote. For years, we looked down on you, judged you, erased you. You were right. The truth has humbled us, and I hope in time you might find it in your heart to forgive. I read the letter once. Then I folded it, placed it in a drawer, and never responded. Silence was my answer. Forgiveness is a gift, and some people are not entitled to it. The world wanted me to comment, to explain myself. Reporters reached out, neighbors whispered, even distant relatives called. But I said nothing. I didn't need to. The evidence had spoken. Helen's voice had spoken. And the silence that followed was more powerful than any rebuttal. Sophia never called again. She moved across the country, changed her name on social media, tried to bury the viral shame. The Whitfields faded into obscurity, their once proud name reduced to a cautionary tale. And me, I went back to my condo, my quiet life, and my promise. Helen's iPhone still sits on my nightstand fully charged. Sometimes I play the happy memos, the ones where she's laughing with Sophia, where her voice is still strong, still alive. Those are the recordings that keep me steady. In the end, silence wasn't just my weapon, it was my peace. I didn't need Sophia's forgiveness, or Marianne's apology, or society's approval. All I needed was the truth and the memory of a woman who understood that truth matters more than appearances. Some battles are fought with words, others with silence. Mine was fought with both, and silence won. 6 months after that night, I sat in my financial advisor's office, signing away the bulk of my fortune. $73.9 million transferred into a foundation created in Helen's name, the Helen Carter Memorial Fund for Cancer Research. It was the largest donation in Connecticut's history, and when the announcement went public, it didn't come with my name on a plaque or my picture in a magazine spread. It came with hers. Helen, the woman who had lived, simply taught children for $45,000 a year and believed dignity was worth more than diamonds. The money built research labs, funded clinical trials, and opened support programs for families who sat in hospital rooms, just like I once did, praying for more time. The remaining $100,000 was more than enough for me. I kept my condo, my old car, my quiet life. People asked me if I regretted it, walking away from luxury, from status, from revenge that could have made me untouchable. The truth is, I never wanted revenge. I wanted justice. Justice for Helen's memory. Justice for the truth. Justice for myself after 8 years of silence. Sophia never called again, and I never reached out. The Whitfields faded, their name reduced to a whispered cautionary tale at dinner parties. But the foundation thrived. Every quarter I received reports, families given hope, patients receiving treatments, researchers funded by the money my daughter once thought she was entitled to. And every time I read those reports, I heard Helen's voice reminding me why I chose this path. I keep a rose gold iPhone on my nightstand still charged. Sometimes late at night I play the happy memos, the ones where she's laughing with Sophia in the kitchen or singing softly as she graded papers. Those are the memories that matter. Not the lies told in a ballroom, not the humiliation, not the viral videos. When people ask me what it costs to expose the truth, I tell them this. Some lessons are worth $74 million. And now I want to ask you, what lesson would you be willing to pay for? Would you trade comfort for truth? Would you give up wealth for dignity? Drop your answer in the comments below because I want to know how you would have handled this family drama. If this story struck a nerve, hit save so you can come back to it, and don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like this, stories that remind us why silence can be the most powerful weapon of all. Because sometimes the quietest man in the room holds the loudest truth.